Thanks so much for joining us today. We're calling you here today right now because in just a couple hours, House Bill 436, which, as you know, is the largest tax cut proposal in state history, is going to be heard in the Senate Tax Committee. It will likely be the last opportunity that the public will have to at least weigh in directly on the issue, although we certainly hope that they will continue to contact legislators before final passage. But we thought it was really important because this is a $600 million cut. It is historic, and it is not something that we get a second bite at the apple on. We don't get to spend $600 million again, or at least we don't get to take that kind of revenue reduction again, while still having any hope of funding infrastructure and schools and all the other things we want to target. And so we need to get this right. And House Bill 436 absolutely does not get it right. And we wanted to intervene at this point and put out our proposal for what we think would be a far more prudent and responsible way to pursue tax cuts in that amount in a way that would genuinely benefit people. Honestly, there are many ways you could pursue a tax cut of this magnitude, but there is almost no way that you could do it that would get less money to the people that need it and to the working families of Idaho than House Bill 436 does. But it also represents an incredible opportunity cost, because once that $600 million is gone, and as we know, it will overwhelmingly be gone to benefit the wealthiest people and most profitable corporations in the state. Once that happens, we have lost our opportunity to pursue other much more helpful forms of tax relief, things like elimination of grocery tax, things like paying down school bonds and levies. There are so many things that we simply won't have the money to do. So with that, we wanted to lay out our vision of what we think would be responsible and helpful tax cuts that would genuinely benefit working families that we could use that money for. So with that, we've prepared a couple graphics to map out our proposal. And if you could pull up, Olivia. We call it the $600 million question. And the question being, what is the better usage of this $600 million? So we know on the right here what House Bill 436 will do. That is, again, going to committee in the next 2 hours. It provides no reduction of grocery tax, leaves the grocery tax on food fully in place. It provides no property tax relief. It provides no money for education or community needs. It provides almost no benefit to most Idahoans. As you all know, it will provide $13,000 checks to those in the top 1% of income and about $75 to most Idahoans. And a lot of that benefit will go out of state. Insofar as those cuts are going to corporations, 81% of those corporate shareholders are out of state. In contrast, we have the Democrats' proposal, which you'll see here on the left, the Idaho Working Families Agenda. We propose ending the grocery tax, saving Idaho consumers at the grocery store $196 million. We propose over $380 million in property tax reduction, a $20 million refundable child tax credit, funding of critical needs in the education and local communities and safety areas, which would actually translate directly into property tax relief. And in terms of distribution of these benefits, our proposal would overwhelmingly benefit the working families in Idaho as opposed to the wealthiest and most well-connected. And in terms of specifics of what precisely we're proposing, Olivia, here we are. And again, we believe this is a much better use of the $600 million in question than what is being put forth in House Bill 436. So you'll see here, because some of this money is ongoing and some of it is one time, and we don't know whether it'll be there in the future, we have divided our proposals into ongoing relief versus one-time costs. So the cost of repealing the sales tax on groceries, as you see there, $196 million, making the child tax credit refundable so that every family receives the full value, $20 million. We, of course, are proposing restoring the indexed homeowners exemption and pegging it to housing costs. This would be free to the general fund. Funding EMS needs. We received a report from OPE that this is a dire need in the state, and there are large areas of Idaho that have no funding, have no paid personnel, and are really struggling, don't even have the actual ambulances and equipment to save people when they fall off a ladder or have a stroke in rural Idaho. This is critical. We should not be looking at any checks being cut to millionaires when we can't ensure the very basic safety of people in Idaho, that when they call 911, somebody will show up. We more than double the property tax assistance program known as the circuit breaker. Moving to one-time costs, we have a proposal to distribute a substantial amount in $250 million actually to school districts to enable them to pay down their bonds and levies, which again would lead to direct, immediate property tax relief to the people of Idaho. Insofar as there are districts who do not have property to levies and bonds in place, that's a very small minority of districts in Idaho, as we know. But those districts would be able to use the money to address their education and school facility needs. Those tend to be the poorest districts in Idaho. And so it's really extra important that they have that money because they are so low income, they probably weren't even able to pass bonds and levies. And finally, distributing the balance of the internet sales tax fund, that Wayfair fund, to local government for facilities needs, reducing future property tax and addressing immediate and pressing needs at the county and city levels. So that is an overview of our counter proposal, which again presents a balance of one-time expense and ongoing investment, but that we think really puts the people of Idaho and the working families of Idaho first and addresses real and pressing needs, not something that nobody was asking for and nobody wants, which is this giant giveaway in corporate and income tax cuts. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Senator Ward Engelking.
Well, thank you, and thank you for being here. I would just add a few things. First of all, we have 115 traditional public school districts in the state, and over 90 of them ran levies this year, and the amount of those levies that did pass, they didn't all pass, but the ones that passed are $218 million. So you can see that we have a huge need in our local school districts, and that we're not funding adequately at the statewide level. That's why those levies are in place and needed. They're certainly not supplemental. They're needed just to keep the doors open, so, and pay the bills. So that's 218 million right there. And with a recent OPE study, we found out that only 10% of our schools are rated excellent in condition, not in their academic delivery or performance, but in the physical maintenance and of the building itself. 10% are in excellent condition. Many of them are, nearing 100 years old. So, and there was almost 20% that were in poor condition. And, it takes us 67% of the voters to approve a bond. And with our skyrocketing property taxes, that's just not possible to get those passed anymore. People in the state of Idaho, their property taxes have gone up. And so school districts aren't able to pass the bonds they need to repair and maintain their buildings. So we're really in a situation here where we ought to be doing what's necessary to make sure our children are in state-of-the-art buildings, not in century-old buildings. So I think that's critical. And that online sales tax is accruing between 10 and 12 million or more a month. It should be going into the general fund. It's a sales tax. It should be treated like all other sales tax, and schools and businesses and schools and people should be getting the cut. Local communities and counties should be getting their fair share of that.
So with that, we are going to open it up for questions, and we'll also have Senator Michelle Stennett and Lauren Necochea here to help answer those. And so feel free to use the raise your hand function, or if you'd prefer typing something in the chat or just unmuting yourselves, and we'll kind of facilitate that. So I'll open it up.
On the grocery tax repeal, are you leaving the credit in place? How do you arrive at your numbers?
I can answer that. This is modeled on a personal bill, House Bill 370, if I'm getting the number correct. It would repeal the credit, but keep locals whole, would increase revenue sharing from the sales tax to keep locals whole, to make sure we don't have an impact on property taxes.
Can I add a follow-up to that question? Why not just increase the grocery tax credit and capitalize on the taxes paid on groceries from out-of-state visitors and others?
I think there is a lot of value in that approach. What a lot of hunger advocates have been asking for is making groceries cheaper today for Idahoans, so that when they hit that crunch time. I think we would all certainly rather increase the grocery tax credit than do this totally lopsided one-time rebate where people people who sitting on the most money get very, very big checks, and people with small, with meager incomes and who face low wages get a one-time check for $75. So increasing the grocery tax credit would also be much more fair and appropriate than what we're seeing coming up from the Republicans in the legislature.
And there's also the issue that, many people, including those most on the margins in society, don't actually file taxes, so they wouldn't get the benefit potentially of an increased tax credit. But as my good colleague said, we would take anything over House Bill 436. So almost any configuration of policy you could choose that would be more equitable and reasonable than what is being put forth.
And if
The first time, sorry, Janie, go ahead.
I'm sorry. If I could just add, I've had thousands of emails and not a single person has asked for an income tax reduction. They've asked for help on their property taxes, and they've asked for something to be done with the taxes on groceries. That's what's really hitting them every single day.
I say there's a question in the chat from James Dawson. And he says, have there been any talks with committee chairs as to whether any of these proposals would get introduced?
Yes, at various times we have been shot down, I believe, on every single one of these proposals.
Yep.
And then I'm going to turn it over to Idaho Reports. And then Brian Clark has a question in the chat as well, which we'll get to after this.
There, Logan Finney with Idaho Reports. In the graphics that you put up, it said you proposed to increase the homeowner's exemption and peg it to housing costs. And so I'm curious what the metric for tying it to housing costs would be, if that's an index or tying it to local numbers. What sort of mechanism or do you have in mind?
I can answer that. I think what makes the most sense in Idaho, because our housing markets are so different across the state, is a county-based homeowners exemption. And this is a bill I drafted last year, and we'll try again with this year. But the state tax commission does an analysis that gives us a really easy to use anchor for looking at how local values are fluctuating, and then we could adjust the homeowners exemption accordingly. We need a different homeowners exemption in Ada County, one could argue, than in a sparsely populated rural county. But regardless, we know that if it hadn't been capped by the Republicans in the legislature in 2016, that homeowners exemption would be valued at $175,000 today. And instead they only nudged it up a little bit to $125,000 last year. And that is completely inadequate. And that's why we're continuing to hear, as Senator Ward Engelking said, we're continuing to hear from so many constituents that their property taxes continue to rise at an unsustainable rate. And the House Bill 389, which was supposed to be the solution last year, did not fix any of those problems and only made some other problems worse.
Thank you.
I would also insert that it is impacting the rural communities, and counties are not immune to the growth. They tend to be the bedroom areas of what growth is happening in urban centers. And surprisingly, some of our poorest counties are having the biggest impact because of the affluence that's coming out of the larger counties around them and finding low cost housing in places, especially when there's so little inventory. So this is impacting much broader than people think, and therefore a much larger portion of the state. Also, if you've been paying attention to any of the news that's out there recently, with the inflation that has happened on groceries, many people feel things in their pocketbook immediately. And so however it is that we can give them relief, particularly those that don't have large incomes to begin with and are, as Representative Necochea mentioned, are flagged from our hunger coalitions and so on as those in need of getting affordable food for their families. If you ask anyone, they're worried about the cost of milk and eggs and, you know, and meat and this sort of thing. And that seems to be foremost on their minds as we're going forward. And so anything that we can do to give them relief in any kind of formula compared to what we're sitting on right now would help them. But as was mentioned, immediate help rather than waiting for a tax return or something down the road, people have been asking for. And I think we need to have an earnest effort to try to see if we can give them some relief.
And then Brian Clark asked, would non-filers miss out on the CTC refundability piece, so the child tax credit?
Yeah, that is an issue with the child tax credit, and I am hopeful that the more we can do for working folks, the more we can, the more word will get out, and the more people will file, because we do want people to get that advantage of the grocery tax credit and the child tax credit. The reason it's important to make that child tax credit refundable is that in 2018, after the big federal tax bill, when we did conformity, we saw that with changes we were going to make, we were going to increase income taxes on families, and especially large families. So the more kids you have, the more your taxes would go up. And so that's when the state child tax credit was first introduced as part of the package with conformity. And actually what happened on the House side was they passed a child tax credit that was too low, and then kind of word got out that this was still going to be a big tax increase on families. And then through that negotiation with the Senate, that our state child tax credit was actually increased, but it didn't fully protect large middle-class families from a tax increase. So one reason we want to have a fully refundable child tax credit, one reason we want to let every family in Idaho get the full value of that child tax credit, not just the wealthiest Idahoans, is that it will shield them from that increase that shouldn't have happened in 2018. But also, why shouldn't every family get the full value of it? Why should it just be the highest earners? We think all families need those extra dollars in their pockets for those basic necessities.
And then Andrew Bartlane has a question, and then we'll go to another one in the chat.
Thank you. I'm curious, I keep hearing this a lot from the Democrats lately about nobody's asking for income tax relief. And I believe we touched on that earlier today as well. But Boise State's public policy survey reported that income tax relief is tied with property tax relief at 37%. That was what people said in that survey they favored the most. So I'm curious where we arrived at this conclusion that people don't want income tax relief and they favor other forms of tax relief.
Oh, I mean, I saw that result and I was very surprised because anecdotally, we get a lot of emails. We get hundreds of emails a day. We get a lot of calls a day. We hold a lot of town halls with hundreds of people coming out to town halls. And so anecdotally, we have a tremendous amount of constituent feedback. And I have volumes and volumes and volumes of people writing to me about property taxes and seeking grocery tax repeal, but I have never received an email seeking income tax cuts or corporate tax cuts for that matter. So certainly based on, I don't know what they're telling BSU, but they are certainly not telling us that income tax and corporate tax cuts are in any way a priority.
And I think maybe if somebody's asked, would you like an income tax cut? I think that might be yes. But when you ask them to prioritize, then it's a totally different story. And because I've yet to receive one single email saying, please get me an income tax reduction.
We've also asked our Senate Republican colleagues whether they have either, and we haven't met a single one that said anything about, nope, it's all property tax. We haven't seen anything about income tax. And so it's interesting, what we are hearing was very different, but I do agree with Senator Ward Engelking. If we were to ask somebody, would you prefer not to pay taxes? They're going to say, yeah, sure, we don't want to pay taxes, and so what taxes do you want? Instead of following up and say, what taxes are a burden to you the most, then you might get a little different answer. But if you asked anybody if they prefer not to pay taxes, then most all of us would say, sure, don't want to.
And
So I'm not really sure how it was proposed, but we were surprised that they had met, they were on par with each other in the survey.
And
Yeah.
certainly, and when you watch the debate on the House floor, the Republicans that were standing up were all in line with what we're saying. So this is not just the Democrats saying this, but almost every Republican that stood up to debate that bill, and I think as was noted in the pundits for it, they kind of did it with their note with their finger on their nose and said, well, I guess I'll vote for this because it's a tax cut and I need to look like I'm voting for tax cuts. But really what I'm hearing from constituents is that they want property tax cuts. So I think it is not just us. Everything we're hearing from our colleagues is also that the hurt in their communities is coming from excessively high property taxes.
Yeah, I would just one other dash of salt. Another very important question in that survey was, what should Idaho do with these dollars that we have sitting on the bottom line? And I think it was less than a quarter of the people even said tax cuts at all. Other sorts of investments were much more, that's what Idahoans were much more interested in, investments other than a tax cut. And yeah, I'll just echo the people. I think the people who want a property tax reduction, they want it passionately. They are, worried about getting tax out of their home, and that's why we are hearing from them. So I think it's a much more urgent issue for those people who prefer be addressed property taxes.
And I'm going to jump in on the next chat because it sort of follows up. Representative Rebel and I were on a panel recently where the Speaker of the House and the Pro Tem of the Senate sit with us, and we do this often in front of groups. And there was a commitment by the Speaker right in front of the group that says, I understand that we need to be looking into other tax relief and that it is urgent. And he made the commitment to Representative Rebel that he'd work with her on making sure that we come up with something that would be co-sponsored. And I know that was the question about whether we're seeking co-sponsorship. Well, we always seek co-sponsorship. That's the way good policy happens. And we always hope that we can make sure that we're doing something that is agreeable to all sides, because that, again, is the best policy. So we'll see whether we succeed, but there is a commitment, at least from the rhetoric, that we will end up with other things to give relief and that it can be bipartisan.
I would just say, though, from a JFAC point of view, once this money is allocated as a income tax reduction, it's gone. We can't claw it back. We're not going to be able to say, okay, we can do this and these other cuts also. Once that money's gone, that ongoing money is gone, though there's not room to do the other tax cuts that Idahoans so desperately want.
And so Scott McIntosh has asked a couple questions. So his first question is there any concern, either philosophically or even legally, about taking income tax revenue coming to the state and shifting it to pay for school bonds, which are paid at a local level and passage of which are made on a local level?
Well, so to be clear, I think there would be an inequity if we just went around and only paid down the school bonds, because some districts have them and some districts don't, and that would not be a fair distribution. What we're proposing is a distribution according to the school funding formula, basically going by that enrollment model, so that districts are receiving the amount of money fairly according to what portion they're entitled to under ordinary distribution of education funds. But it would be a special tranche of money sent to those areas with the directive that the first thing to be done is to pay down those bonds and levies. And if they don't have bonds or levies, or if there's residual money after that, it can be used for other educational and facilities purposes. But it would not be, what we're envisioning is not the state stepping in with general funds and just directly paying off bonds only for those districts that have bonds and levies.
And if I might add, we do send facilities money out to charter school districts already. They can't run a bond or a levy. So the state does send out facilities money to charter schools, and they do it on a per pupil basis. And in reality, we're in the same boat. Traditional public schools are in the same boat as those charter schools right now. They can't pass a bond or a levy in some areas, and so it's just too onerous for the patrons to put it on their property tax. So we're in the same boat. We could do what we do for charter schools.
beyond what it would do in order to get relief and debt out of our public schools, it also would give a huge relief to property owners, because your ability to not be paying those property taxes that supports those bonds and levies gives immediate relief to your property taxes. And so it is a benefit for both, and there is a way forward to do it equitably. And as Representative Rebel mentioned.
And then Scott's next question is, how do you respond to the reasoning that Idaho needs to reduce its income tax rates to compete with other states?
I just spoke with a group that about 2 weeks ago, there was a think tank that had a virtual presentation, and they were the gurus, the people in the know nationally about how tax burdens affect all of the states. And they said that we do remarkably well, considering that we are a 3 tax system. So we have both the property sales tax and an income tax. Even with that, we were highly competitive, somewhere in the mid-range of every other state in the nation, which is an affirmation that we are not highly taxed to begin with. They also said that if we were to look at something that needs immediate scrutiny as far as a tax burden on the people, we rank second in our property tax, only second to Utah. So they highly recommended that we address the property tax, but that we are pretty even on the 3 tax structure that Idaho has compared to other states in the country.
And I would add to that, I mean, we are, certainly we're the fastest growing, but the things that are listed, and when I've gone to ATI conferences and seen data from Commerce and whatnot, when companies list the things that they would most like to see changed to make Idaho more appealing, our corporate income tax level is very far down the list. The things that they're citing are lack of access to childcare, lack of affordable housing, housing costs generally, including property taxes, concerns about the quality of education for kids of the workforce they may be trying to attract to the state. And on those lists, I believe that our corporate tax rate tends to be around at least 5th, if not lower, on their list of concerns. Now, House Bill 436 super prioritizes that and says, we will give you the 5th thing on your list at the expense of ever being able to solve items 1 through 4 on the list. And so if what we're looking to do is address the concerns of businesses to make ourselves more attractive, this is the last thing we should be looking at. And we certainly shouldn't be looking at it insofar as it makes it very much more difficult for us to improve our education system, much more difficult for us to bring down housing costs by lowering property tax rates. It does not make any sense to be focusing all of our efforts on the 5th most important thing, and thereby worsening the most important things to businesses when determining whether they want to come to Idaho.
I think that's exactly right. Businesses need a range of things to succeed. They need an educated workforce, and just a positive business environment. And we have much more work. The areas where we need to do more work is in having that educated workforce on the rankings that I've seen. I think we also want to not, broadcast that we have extremist ideology. That can be a turnoff for employees that employers might want to be recruiting to our state. So I think there are a range of common sense things we need to be focused on for business. And I dropped into the chat the Idaho State Tax Commission's tax burden study that really shows that we're really on the lower end when it comes to how much revenue we collect. We are middle of the pack when it comes to total income tax collections. We're kind of a lower income state, so our rates might have to be a little bit higher just to get to 50th in the nation for education investment, for example. But I do get tired of hearing this, because it's kind of just a one-note song that we need to just keep lowering the corporate tax rate. When the economy is hot, as it is today, they're saying we need to lower the corporate tax rate. When the economy is sluggish, they say we need to lower the corporate tax rate. When we're humming along, they say we need to lower the corporate tax rate. And that's just that thinking has led us to miss an array of other opportunities that would help us build a stronger economy by putting more dollars into the hands of people who are going to spend those dollars in the economy. When we pass a big corporate tax rate, over 80% of those dollars just flow right out of the state because that's where corporate owners live all over the world. And we can do a lot better by our local communities and by Main Street by putting more dollars into the hands of working families.
And if I just might add, by only putting one tax bill out there, I mean, and that's what we're seeing. There's just one, that's all that's been printed. We're not allowing the public to weigh in on their priorities and what they would like to see the legislature do. In fact, we're not even allowing legislators to make a decision. It's the only bill out there, and they're being pressured to do a tax cut of some kind, as we should when we're seeing over 600 million in all ongoing surplus. But there's no other option out there, and we're being told that this is it. And that's wrong on so many levels.
I was gonna say there's go to a question from Idaho Reports. How would your caucus distribute the balance of the internet sales tax / tax relief fund? Send it out in a specific way to local governments or direct it through the regular revenue sharing formula?
But we should be doing what the Constitution told us to do for local governments right out of the gates to begin with. We have accrued a tremendous amount of money because of the amount of people who've gone on to online purchasing. And historically and usually sales tax at 11.5% goes to local governments who use it for all of our community emergency services and care and the things that impact Idahoans every day, all the time: local roads, local ambulances, fire and law enforcement, and all of that sort of thing. When you make a fund like the Wayfarer Fund or a tax relief fund, which some of this money for a tax relief came out of, you directly take it away from the local governments to do their basic services, which they deserve to have. Just constitutionally, we have done that. And so what happens then is they have to pressure again the property tax owners in order to make those services work. And so one of the things that we should be doing is making sure we do what is right and proper and give local governments their fair share of what's happening on online sales tax.
And if you look at the specifics of our proposal, it's exactly right. We consider this Wayfair Fund to be stolen monies almost. It's been stolen from local governments, and it's been stolen from the general fund and from schools. And unfortunately, a great deal of it has already been distributed in extremely inequitable income tax cuts to the wealthiest. But our proposal is that the block that is left in that Wayfair Fund should be distributed to local governments to essentially make them whole from the 3 years worth of theft that they have experienced that they should have received. And the amount that's left in that fund is, you know, it would help a lot, but it's one-time money. And we think that, you know, when you're looking at one-time money versus ongoing money, it makes a little more fiscal sense to be looking at one-time capital expenditures and types of facilities and those infrastructural expenses that will last you for decades, as opposed to, you know, investing in ongoing full-time employees or something that will be an ongoing expense. So our proposal is that going forward, we immediately sunset that and just distribute it. Internet sales tax, the same as regular sales tax, exactly what Senator Sennett said, and just, you know, feed it through the normal formula. As for the funds that are in the Wayfair Fund, we are proposing distribution to local governments to address facilities needs, which we think will have an ongoing property tax relief effect as they get out ahead of needs, address longstanding needs, deferred maintenance, and will substantially reduce the amount that they will have to turn to property tax payers for an ongoing basis to fill.
And that online sales tax was originally supposed to have a sunset on it. And after 5 years, it was to go into the general fund. And what this new tax bill will do is that will negate that sunset. And so we are going to sidestep what was initially planned. Nobody envisioned that online sales tax was going to accrue at that level. Nobody envisioned the pandemic and people getting used to shopping online and continuing that. So it's going to be a problem later on as people continue to increase their online footprint.
And I know that Representative Necochea has been talking with Scott in the chat about this, but he had asked, how did you arrive at the 20 million?
Oh, I can't hear Olivia. Olivia, are you muted?
Cut out a little bit, Olivia, but I think she's repeating Scott's question. And it's about making the child tax credit we have refundable. So right now, the existing tax credit for $205 per child is non-refundable. That means you can take it as a discount off your tax bill. But if that takes your tax bill to zero, you don't get the full value of it. So if you're a lower to middle income family, but especially if you are a family with a lot of kids, you aren't getting the full value of that credit. Hopefully that helps, Scott.
Oh, and I think he also, how did you arrive at the $20 million figure for the child tax care credit?
Yeah, that's just a rough estimate from legislative, making the current, not changing the value of the child tax credit, but making it fully refundable so that everybody gets the full value, not just people with higher incomes or with fewer children.
Yes, thank you. That helps clarify. And just to clarify too, it's the child tax credit, not an additional child care tax credit, correct?
That's correct.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
So I think that we have got through all the chat questions. Is there anything else anyone wants to add? If not, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thank you all so much for coming. We really appreciate it, and have a
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks and have a great day.